Welcome to LinesToGo installation videos. Today we will be installing stainless steel brake lines on a 2013 Hyundai Veloster using LinesToGo part number BLH-103-SS. While this particular installation is being performed on a 2013 Veloster, this set of lines will also fit the following year, make, and models as shown on your screen now. LinesToGo lines are made using original equipment end forms and fittings that are CNC bent for an easy and precise installation. We have also upgraded to stainless steel braided Teflon hoses for rust protection and to prevent surface fouling. These have an unlimited shelf life and anti-static PTFE liner. This set of LinesToGo lines are made using 304L stainless steel for rust resistance that exceeds OEM standards. Tech tip: disconnect the battery before working on a vehicle to reduce the risk of shorting out the battery on tools or lines. LinesToGo lines are made with a sectional design for easier installation. We also use color-coded unions on our sectioned lines. Just match the colors at the connections. Tools required: 10mm, 12mm, 13mm, and 21mm sockets and ratchet, 10mm, 11mm, 12mm, 13mm, and 14mm wrenches, pliers and cutting pliers, pick, flat blade and Phillips blade screwdrivers, drain pan, jack and jack stands. The level of difficulty for this installation is considered to be easy. Start by disconnecting both battery terminals using a 10mm socket. Lift up on the plastic engine cover to remove it from the vehicle. Use a 10mm socket to loosen the two clamps on the intake air tube. Remove the two rubber tubes that attach to the intake air tube using a pair of pliers to open the spring clamps. Remove the intake air tube from the vehicle. Use a 13mm socket to remove the bolt that secures the battery and remove the battery from the vehicle. Remove the two electrical connectors from the top of the ECM by lifting up on the plastic arms to disconnect them. Use a 10mm socket to remove the three bolts that secure the ECM and remove it from the vehicle. Raise and support the vehicle and use a 21mm socket to remove all four wheels from the vehicle. At the driver's side bottom of the radiator, loosen the plastic drain screw to start to drain the engine coolant. Drain the coolant into a clean container to be reused later. Once the coolant is done draining, tighten the plastic drain screw. At the firewall behind the engine, use a pair of pliers to remove the two heater core hoses. Have a drain pan ready as there may still be a little coolant left in the system. At the firewall, use a 10mm wrench to remove the two brake line support brackets and remove the plastic clips from the lines. Use a 14mm wrench to remove the two threaded fittings from the master cylinder. At the ABS module, use an 11mm and a 14mm wrench to remove all 6 threaded fittings from the module. Remove the plastic wiring harness clip from the threaded post behind the ABS module. Remove the primary and secondary brake lines from the vehicle. Remove the two top threaded fittings from the factory unions located above the driver's side rear of the front subframe. We found it easiest to reach these fittings by reaching down from the top of the engine bay. Use a pair of cutting pliers to cut the 3 brake lines that run underneath the air conditioning connection at the firewall. Remove the 3 passenger side sections of the brake lines that run behind the engine. Remove the 2 sections of the rear brake lines on the driver's side of the firewall. Use an 11mm wrench to remove the threaded fitting from the top of the left front flex hose and remove the remaining section of the left front brake line from the vehicle. Use an 11mm wrench to remove the threaded fitting from the top of the right front flex hose. Remove the right front brake line from the plastic clips and use a pair of cutting pliers to cut the right front line beside the engine. Remove both sections of the right front brake line from the vehicle. Use an 11mm wrench to remove the two threaded fittings from the rear of the factory union. Use a Phillips blade screwdriver or pick to remove the plastic push clips that secure the plastic tray underneath the vehicle that cover the fuel and brake lines. Next, use a flat blade screwdriver to remove the plastic clips that secure the plastic cover underneath the vehicle. Use a 10mm socket to remove the two nuts that secure the plastic cover located in front of the fuel tank. Next, use a pair of cutting pliers to cut the rear lines to make them easier to remove from the vehicle. Cut the right rear line at the driver's side rear of the fuel tank beside the fuel tank strap and the left rear line at the left front of the fuel tank. Remove the rear lines from the plastic retaining clips. Using a 12mm socket, remove the bolt that secures the left rear park brake cable to the body of the vehicle. Next, we will need to unhook the fuel filler and vent hoses from the filler neck in order to have room to route the line. Use a 10mm socket to loosen the clamp on the filler hose and a pair of pliers to remove the spring clamp from the vent hose. Remove both hoses from the filler neck. Remove the vent valve electrical connector along with the plastic clip that secures the wiring to the metal bracket. Remove the center section of rear brake lines from the vehicle. Use an 11mm wrench to remove the threaded fitting from the top of the left rear flex hose. Remove the final section of the left rear brake line from the vehicle. Use an 11mm wrench to remove the threaded fitting from the top of the right rear flex hose. Remove the final section of the right rear brake line from the vehicle. To begin the installation of your new LinesToGo brake lines, start by installing the rearmost section of the right rear brake line labeled 06D into position. Start the rear threaded fitting into the top of the right rear flex hose. Secure the line into the plastic clips. Install the next section of the right rear LinesToGo brake line labeled 06C into position, routing it above the rear axle and around the fuel tank. Secure the line into the plastic clips. Connect the two sections of line using the supplied union noting the LinesToGo color-coded connection. Install the next section of the right rear LinesToGo brake line labeled 06B into position, routing the front of the line over the front subframe. Start the front threaded fitting into the rear side of the top threaded union. We found it easiest to start this fitting from the top of the vehicle. Connect the two sections of line using the supplied union noting the LinesToGo color-coded connection. Tighten the fittings in the factory union and the right rear flex hose using a 12mm wrench. Tighten the LinesToGo unions using a 12mm and a 13mm wrench. Next, install the rearmost left rear LinesToGo brake line labeled 05C into position. Start the rear threaded fitting into the top of the left rear flex hose by hand. Secure the line into the plastic clips. Install the next section of the left rear LinesToGo brake line labeled 05B into position and secure it into the plastic clips. Start the front threaded fitting into the rear of the bottom factory union. Connect the two sections of line using the supplied union, noting the LinesToGo color-coded connection. Tighten the fittings in the front factory union and the left rear flex hose using a 12mm wrench. Tighten the LinesToGo union using a 12mm and a 13mm wrench. Replace the two hoses on the fuel filler neck and secure them using a pair of pliers and a 10mm socket. Replace the electrical connector at the vent valve. Replace the parking brake bracket and secure it using a 12mm socket. Replace the plastic cover in front of the fuel tank and secure it using a 10mm socket. Replace the plastic cover over the brake and fuel lines. Install the plastic push clips removed earlier. 3 of the lines at the firewall have been redesigned so that the installation can be done without the removal of the air conditioning connection at the firewall. Next, install the front LinesToGo brake line labeled 03 into position. Start one threaded fitting into the top of the left front flex hose by hand. Start the other fitting into the top rearmost port in the ABS module by hand and tighten both fittings using a 12mm wrench. Next, install the final section of the right rear LinesToGo brake line labeled 06A into position. Start one fitting into the top forward-facing factory union and the other fitting into the top rear central port in the ABS module. Tighten both fittings using a 12mm wrench. Next, install the final section of the left rear LinesToGo brake line labeled 05A into position. Start one fitting into the bottom forward-facing factory union and the other fitting into the top front central port in the ABS module. Tighten both fittings using a 12mm wrench. Next, install the first section of the right front LinesToGo brake line labeled 04A into position. Start the top fitting into the top forwardmost port in the ABS module by hand. Secure the line into the plastic clips. Next, install the final section of the right front LinesToGo brake line labeled 04B into position, routing it through the rubber grommet. Start the bottom threaded fitting into the top of the right front flex hose by hand. Connect the two sections of line using the supplied union, noting the LinesToGo color-coded connection. Tighten the fittings in the ABS module and the flex hose using a 12mm wrench. Tighten the LinesToGo union using a 12mm and a 13mm wrench. Next, install the primary LinesToGo brake line labeled 01 into position, routing the passenger side of the line underneath the air conditioning lines. Start one fitting into the rear horizontal port in the ABS module by hand. Start the other fitting into the rear port in the master cylinder. Tighten both fittings using a 12mm wrench. Next, install the secondary LinesToGo brake line labeled 02 into position, routing the passenger side of the line underneath the air conditioning lines. Start one fitting into the front horizontal port in the ABS module by hand. Start the other fitting into the front port in the master cylinder. Tighten both fittings using a 12mm wrench. Replace the plastic clips at the firewall and secure them using a 10mm wrench. Replace the two heater core tubes and secure the spring clamps using a pair of pliers. Bleed all 4 wheels using a 10mm wrench, making sure to keep the master cylinder reservoir topped up with fluid. Replace all 4 wheels and torque to your manufacturer's recommended specification using a 21mm socket. Replace the ECM back into position and secure it using a 10mm socket. Reconnect the two electrical connectors and secure them using the plastic locking levers. Install the battery and tighten the hold-down bracket using a 13mm socket. Replace the intake air tube back into position and secure the clamps on either end using a 10mm socket. Reconnect the two tubes to the intake tube and secure the spring clamps using a pair of pliers. Replace the plastic engine cover. Reconnect both battery terminals and tighten using a 10mm socket. Start the vehicle and top up the coolant level as required. Make sure the coolant overflow bottle is filled to the full line indicated on the side. This concludes the installation of stainless steel brake lines on a 2013 Hyundai Veloster using LinesToGo part number BLH-103-SS. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions or would like to purchase the lines you saw today, please call us at 1-855-781-5992. Email us at info@linestogo.com or check out our website link below. Don't forget to take advantage of our free next day shipping. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button below, and we will see you in our next video.